Unaware she had just inherited the very company signing his $500 million deal that very evening, Elena Mitchell watched from the shadows of the Crescent Hotel ballroom as her husband Marcus commanded the stage in his silver gray suit, basking in applause from Dallas's elite circle. But when she stepped forward to congratulate him, he poured red wine down her dress and called her unworthy to stand among people of his caliber, humiliating her in front of 500 witnesses who gasped at his cruelty. The wife he dismissed as ordinary absorbed every stare, every whisper, every pitying glance with quiet dignity. But what Marcus didn't know was that the company funding his entire deal, the investors applauding his success, the empire he thought he'd built, all of it belonged to the woman now walking away from him in wine-soaked silence. As Elena disappeared through the ballroom doors, she pulled out her phone and made a single call that would terminate the $500 million contract and pull every investment her holding companies had placed in his firm, leaving the man who poured wine on his wife completely unaware that the ground beneath his elite circle was about to shatter. But how long had she known about his affairs, his arrogance, his secret life? Why had a billionaire heiress hidden her power from the husband who now stood smiling on stage, seconds away from losing everything? And what would Marcus do next when he discovered the wife he called unworthy was the very force that could and would destroy him? The chandeliers of the Crescent Hotel blazed like captured stars, casting golden light across marble floors where Dallas's most powerful figures gathered in designer gowns and tailored suits worth more than most people's annual salaries. Elena Mitchell stood near the back wall, her navy dress simple and understated among the sequins and silk, watching her husband of 7 years command the stage with the charisma that had first drawn her to him in that university library a decade ago when they were both hungry students dreaming of futures they couldn't yet imagine. Marcus Mitchell's silver gray suit fit him perfectly, custom tailored to emphasize the physique he maintained with a personal trainer 3 times weekly, and his smile, that brilliant, confident smile, captivated the room of 800 guests gathered for what the media had dubbed the deal of the decade. Behind him, projection screens displayed architectural renderings of the luxury development his firm would construct. 50-story towers of glass and steel that would reshape the Dallas skyline and cement his reputation as one of the city's elite real estate developers. This $500 million project represents not just buildings, Marcus declared, his voice resonating through the sound system with practiced polish, but the future of urban luxury living. And I want to thank Meridian Capital Holdings for believing in this vision, for investing in excellence, for recognizing that true success requires both ambition and execution. Elena's fingers tightened around her clutch as applause thundered through the ballroom. Meridian Capital Holdings. The name rolled through the crowd like a blessing, whispered with reverence by men in Rolexes and women dripping in diamonds. None of them knew. Not a single person in this room understood that Meridian Capital Holdings was merely one branch of the trust structure Elena had built over 15 years, starting with the inheritance from her grandmother Margaret Ashford, a woman who taught her that true power was silent, that influence worked best from shadows, and that the moment people knew you held the cards was the moment you'd already lost control of the game. She'd been 23 when grandmother Margaret died, leaving her the Ashford industrial fortune built over 4 generations, along with advice whispered on her deathbed. Hide what you own, Elena. Test the people who claim to love you. Money reveals character the way fire reveals impurities in gold. And you must know what burns away when the flames rise high. So Elena had created layers, holding companies within holding companies, trusts managed by law firms in 3 states, investment vehicles with innocuous names that concealed billions in assets. She'd walk through the world as Marcus's simple wife, the woman who'd supposedly left her graduate program to support his career, the devoted partner who attended his events but never sought spotlight, never demanded recognition, never revealed the empire she quietly commanded from a home office he'd never even bothered to enter. Marcus descended from the stage now, shaking hands with executives from his development team, accepting congratulations from competitors who masked envy behind professional smiles. Elena watched him move through the crowd, observed how his hand lingered on the shoulder of Vanessa Chen, the marketing director who joined his firm 8 months ago, and whose perfume Elena had smelled on his shirts for the past 6 months. She'd known about the affair since March. Known, watched, documented, and waited to see if Marcus would remember the vows he'd made, the promises that once meant everything. Darling, Marcus's voice cut through her thoughts, though his eyes barely met hers as he gestured vaguely in her direction while speaking to a cluster of investors. My wife, Elena. She handles the home front while I build empires. The casual dismissal stung less than it once would have. Elena had grown accustomed to being introduced as an afterthought, the domestic accessory to his ambitions. She stepped forward, intending to offer a brief congratulation before retreating to her usual position on the periphery, but Marcus's expression shifted the moment she entered his circle. Shifted into something cold and irritated, as if her presence among his colleagues was an intrusion rather than a right. Marcus, congratulations on... What are you doing? His words came sharp and low, but not low enough. The investors nearest them glanced over, curiosity replacing their polite attention. This is a professional environment, Elena. These are serious people discussing serious business. Heat crept up her neck, but she kept her voice steady. I just wanted to... You wanted to what? Insert yourself into conversations beyond your understanding? Marcus's hand reached for the wine glass a server had just delivered to him. Red wine, dark as blood in the crystal. His eyes held something she'd never seen before. Not just dismissal, but contempt, as if 7 years of marriage had evaporated and left behind only his resentment of the ordinary woman who couldn't match his newfound status. You don't belong in this elite circle, Elena. You never have. You're simply not. The wine hit her chest before her mind could process his movement. Cold liquid soaking through navy fabric and spreading across her torso like a wound blooming in slow motion. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Conversations died mid-sentence. 800 pairs of eyes turned toward the woman dripping wine onto marble floors, while her husband stood with an empty glass and something like satisfaction flickering across his features before he remembered his audience and reshaped his expression into manufactured shock. Oh God, I'm sorry, everyone saw. The glass slipped. Marcus's performance began, but Elena wasn't listening anymore. She stood in pooling wine and crystallizing humiliation, feeling the weight of every stare, every whispered speculation, every pitying glance from people who would dissect this moment over expensive brunches for weeks. But beneath the humiliation, beneath the shock and pain, something else crystallized, a cold, perfect clarity she'd been avoiding for months, perhaps years. This was who Marcus had become. This was the man her money had built. Her investments had elevated. Her silent support had enabled to reach heights he believed he'd climbed alone. Elena met his eyes for 3 seconds that stretched like hours, then turned and walked toward the exit with her spine straight and her head high, leaving wet footprints across marble like a trail of evidence. Behind her, Marcus's voice rose in explanation, spinning narratives about accidents and apologies. But she'd already reached the doors, already pulled her phone from her clutch, already dialed the number she'd programmed months ago when she'd first suspected this moment might come. James, she said quietly to her attorney as she stepped into the hotel's silent corridor, execute Protocol 7 immediately. Terminate the Meridian contract with Mitchell Development. Pull every investment from every venture he's touched. I want complete withdrawal within 12 hours. Are you certain, Elena? James Chen's voice carried appropriate gravity for the decision. This will destroy him, Elena finished, watching herself in the corridor's gilded mirrors. A woman in a wine-stained dress who'd just decided to reclaim her power. Yes, I'm certain. Begin now. She ended the call and stood alone in the silence, imagining Marcus on stage still smiling, still accepting congratulations, completely unaware that his elite circle was built on sand and the tide had just turned. Morning sunlight cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elena's minimalist mansion in Highland Park, illuminating white walls and clean lines that Marcus had always called cold because he preferred the ostentation of their previous home, the one she'd quietly sold and he hadn't noticed because the deed had been in her trust's name. She sat at her dining table with coffee steaming beside her laptop, watching her phone light up with confirmation messages from attorneys, financial managers, and board members who'd executed her orders throughout the night with the efficiency of surgeons removing tumors. Meridian contract terminated. Penalties invoiced, venture capital withdrawn. 47 emitters recalled, bridge financing canceled. Mitchell development credit lines closed. Investor consortium dissolved. Partnerships terminated. Each message represented another support beam removed from the empire Marcus thought he'd built with his charm and vision and relentless networking. Elena had always known the truth. She was the foundation. Every major deal he'd closed in the past 5 years had been possible because her capital, funneled through anonymous investment vehicles and carefully structured partnerships, had provided the credibility and resources he'd needed to attract additional investors. She'd been his secret advantage, the hidden force that made banks trust him, that made developers partner with him, that transformed his ambitions from dreams into reality. Now she was his destruction. Her phone buzzed with a call from Marcus. She declined it, watching his name disappear from her screen. 5 minutes later, another call. Declined. Then text messages began flooding in, starting professional and deteriorating into panic. Elena, where are you? Need to discuss something urgent. Call me immediately. Business emergency. What did you do? Elena, this isn't funny. Call me now. Everything is falling apart. The investors are pulling out. The contracts are being canceled. What is happening? She set the phone aside and opened her tablet, pulling up news feeds that were already exploding with the story. Someone had filmed the wine incident. Of course they had. Everyone filmed everything now. And the video had gone viral overnight, accumulating 4 million views and climbing. The headlines competed for the most dramatic framing. Real estate CEO humiliates wife at 500 members signing ceremony. Dallas developers public abuse caught on camera. Wine-throwing executive faces investor exodus. But it was the business sections that told the real story. The deeper collapse that had nothing to do with public opinion and everything to do with money flowing away from Marcus Mitchell like water finding exit routes from a sinking ship. Meridian Capital terminates Mitchell development contract. Mysterious investor, flight leaves, luxury project in jeopardy. Mitchell firm faces financial crisis as backing evaporates. Elena clicked through to a Bloomberg article analyzing the mysterious overnight withdrawal of capital from Marcus's ventures. The journalist had done impressive work, tracing some of the investment threads and identifying patterns of anonymous backing that had suddenly, simultaneously vanished. The article stopped short of identifying the source. Elena's legal structures were designed to resist investigation, but it asked the right questions about who'd had both the power and the motivation to orchestrate such comprehensive financial devastation. Her doorbell rang at 7:43 a.m. Elena checked the security camera feed and saw Marcus standing on her doorstep, still wearing his wrinkled suit from last night, his hair disheveled and his expression wild. She'd expected this. Men like Marcus, men who'd grown comfortable with unearned power, always came demanding explanations when their worlds collapsed, as if understanding the mechanism of their destruction would somehow reverse it. She opened the door but didn't step aside to let him enter. Elena! His voice cracked on her name. Elena, what's happening? Everything. The investors, the contracts, the partnerships. It's all falling apart. Meridian terminated our agreement. They're demanding penalty payments we can't afford, and every other backer is running like the building's on fire. Is it? She asked calmly. Is it what? On fire. Your building. Your empire. Marcus stared at her, confusion and desperation warring in his expression. This isn't a joke. I'm about to lose everything. The firm will collapse. My reputation is destroyed. That video, someone leaked security footage, and now the whole world thinks accurately, Elena interrupted, that you publicly humiliated your wife at the moment of your supposed triumph, that you poured wine on a woman who'd supported you for 7 years and called her unworthy of your elite circle. She let each word land with precision. The world thinks those things because they're true, Marcus. I was drunk. I was stressed. I didn't mean... He ran hands through his hair, the gesture frantic. Elena, please. I know I messed up. I know last night was wrong, but this reaction, investors don't just abandon projects overnight because of a domestic incident. Someone is orchestrating this. Someone with serious power and serious grudges, and I need to find out who before what? She tilted her head slightly, studying him. Before you lose everything you think you built? Before I lose everything I did build. His voice rose, attracting attention from a neighbor walking their dog across the street. 10 years of work, Elena. A decade of 17-hour days and constant pressure and fighting for every deal. My entire career is collapsing, and I don't even understand why. Then perhaps, Elena said softly, you should have spent less time building empires and more time understanding where the foundation came from. Something in her tone finally penetrated his panic. Marcus stopped his frantic pacing and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since he'd arrived. His eyes moved over her calm expression, her composed posture, her complete lack of surprise or concern about his crisis. The recognition came slowly, like a man realizing the ground beneath him wasn't solid after all. What did you do? The question emerged barely above a whisper. I made a phone call, Elena replied. One phone call, Marcus. That's all it took to remove every piece of support your career was built on. That's impossible. You don't have... He struggled to articulate the obvious objection, the one he'd believed for years. You're not involved in business. You don't have connections to Meridian or any of the investment groups. You can't just... Can I? She pulled her phone from her pocket and held it up, showing him the screen filled with confirmation messages. Meridian Capital Holdings, Ashford Investment Trust, Highland Development Partners, Crescent Capital Management. She watched his face pale as she recited the names. What do you think those companies are, Marcus? What do you think has been funding your deals? Providing bridge financing? Attracting additional investors by demonstrating that serious money believed in your projects? His mouth opened, closed, opened again without sound. Elena could see his mind working, connecting threads he'd never bothered to examine before, following money trails he'd taken for granted. No, he finally managed. No, you don't own. You can't. I inherited them, Elena said, her voice still calm, still measured, delivering information like a professor explaining obvious concepts to a slow student. From my grandmother, Margaret Ashford. You met her once at our wedding, though you were too busy networking with my uncle to pay her much attention. She left me everything, Marcus. $4 billion in industrial assets, real estate portfolios, and investment vehicles that I've managed and grown for 15 years, while you thought I was simply your simple wife who handled the home front. The color drained from his face entirely. $4 billion? Actually, it's $6 billion now, she corrected. I've been fairly successful. But you wouldn't know that, would you? Because in 7 years of marriage, you never once asked what I did all day. Never wondered why I had my own office. Never questioned where the money for our lifestyle came from, because you assumed your income covered it, when in fact your income wouldn't cover the property taxes on this house. Marcus grabbed the doorframe for support. The house, this house, mine. The cars you drive, mine. The country club membership, mine. The vacation home in Aspen you bragged about purchasing, mine. I bought them through trust structures because I was testing something, Marcus. I was testing whether the man I loved would stay humble and kind even as his career ascended, or whether success would reveal ugliness I'd been naive enough to miss. Elena, last night you answered my question, she continued, and now her voice carried an edge of pain beneath the calm. You answered it in front of 800 witnesses when you poured wine on your wife and called her unworthy because she didn't match the image of success you wanted to project. So I made my call. I pulled my support, and now you're discovering what you actually built on your own, which is apparently nothing that can stand without the foundation I provided. Marcus slid down the doorframe until he was sitting on her threshold, his expensive suit crumpling against expensive stone. You destroyed my career, he whispered, my entire life. No, Elena corrected, stepping back and beginning to close the door. You destroyed it yourself, Marcus. I just removed my subsidization of your cruelty. There's a difference. She closed the door on his stunned silence and returned to her coffee, which had gone cold, but still tasted like victory. 3 weeks passed like watching dominoes fall in exquisite slow motion. Elena observed from her position of calm power as Marcus's world disintegrated piece by piece, each collapse documented by media outlets that had turned his humiliation into an ongoing narrative about hubris, entitlement, and the dangers of forgetting where your success actually originated. The business television networks ran segments analyzing the mysterious financial backing that had suddenly abandoned Mitchell Development. Elena watched a panel of experts on CNBC speculating about phantom investors and dark money withdrawal, while images of Marcus, increasingly haggard and desperate, played in background loops. One analyst came close to identifying the Ashford connection, but stopped short, presumably respecting the legal walls Elena's attorneys maintained around her privacy. The real estate industry publications went deeper, interviewing former partners who suddenly remembered concerning details about Marcus's over-leveraged finances, his aggressive borrowing practices, his tendency to overestimate timelines and underestimate costs. Elena recognized the pattern of rats leaving ships, but she also acknowledged truth in their assessments. Without her capital providing cushion and credibility, Marcus's operational weaknesses became glaringly obvious. The emperor had no clothes, and now everyone could see. She spent those weeks in her home office, managing her portfolio and reviewing investment opportunities with the same meticulous attention she'd always given her work. Her holdings stretched across industrial manufacturing, commercial real estate, technology startups, and sustainable energy. A diversified empire that generated returns she immediately funneled into philanthropic initiatives her grandmother had started decades ago. The Ashford Foundation funded literacy programs, women's business development, and scholarship opportunities for first-generation college students who reminded Elena of who she'd been before inheritance transformed her circumstances. That's where Marcus found her on a Thursday afternoon, surrounded by grant applications and foundation reports, when her security system alerted her that someone had forced entry through the garden gate. She watched him approach on camera, no longer in tailored suits but in jeans and a t-shirt, driving a Toyota instead of his repossessed Mercedes, looking 10 years older than the confident man who'd commanded that ballroom stage less than a month ago. She met him in the foyer, standing at distance. "How did you get in?" "Climb the gate." He lifted his hands, showing scraped palms. "Security didn't stop me. Guess my name isn't on any authorized lists anymore." "It isn't," Elena confirmed. "You're trespassing, Marcus." I know, and I'm sorry, but I needed..." His voice broke. "Elena, I need to understand. I've spent 3 weeks trying to piece together how this..." He gestured vaguely at her mansion, at everything it represented. "You own the company funding my deal. You own the investors, the capital, everything. How long? How long have you been..." "Since before we met," she said quietly. "I inherited when I was 23. We started dating when I was 24. I've owned this power through our entire relationship, Marcus." He absorbed that, swaying slightly. "And you never told me. Would it have mattered?" She asked the question genuinely, curiously. "Would you have loved me more, respected me more, treated me better if you'd known I was wealthy?" Marcus stopped, and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "No, I would have wanted your money. I would have used you to build my business faster, bigger. I would have seen you as an asset, not a person." "Exactly." Elena folded her arms. "So I hid what I had and watched who you became when you thought I couldn't offer you anything except emotional support. And for a while, Marcus, for several years, I thought maybe I'd found someone who loved me rather than what I could provide. You were ambitious but kind, driven but generous. You remembered birthdays and asked about my day and made me feel like partnership mattered more than status. When did it change?" His question came hoarse. "Gradually," she admitted, and now her own pain surfaced through professional calm. "So gradually I told myself I was imagining it. You worked later hours. You stopped asking about my interests. You started correcting the way I spoke at dinner parties, embarrassed when I didn't know the right wine terminology or couldn't discuss your colleagues' projects in detail. You introduced me as just my wife instead of by name. You forgot our anniversary twice. You started an affair with Vanessa Chen, and didn't bother being discreet about it because you thought I couldn't leave, thought I needed you more than you needed me. Marcus flinched at Vanessa's name. She's gone now, left the day after everything collapsed, said she couldn't be associated with... He stopped. Everyone's gone, Elena. The partners who swore loyalty scattered within 48 hours. The investors who called me brilliant won't return my calls. The properties, they repossessed my cars, froze my accounts. I'm staying in an extended stay motel because the house went into foreclosure and... His voice broke completely. I destroyed everything, and I did it by destroying you first. Elena felt unexpected tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. You did. I'm sorry. He looked at her with something that might have been genuine remorse or might have been desperate manipulation. She couldn't tell anymore. Couldn't trust her ability to read him after years of missing obvious signs. I'm so sorry, Elena. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, doesn't undo the humiliation or the cruelty or the years I took you for granted. But I'm sorry. What do you want, Marcus? She asked the practical question, the one that mattered. Why are you here? You want me to restore your funding? Give you another chance? Pretend this never happened? I don't know if I want that, he said, and the honesty surprised her. I don't know if I could face the business world again, knowing everyone saw me at my worst, knowing they're all laughing about the developer who abused his billionaire wife and paid the ultimate price. But I want, he swallowed hard, I want you to know that I loved you once, genuinely, before success twisted me into someone I don't recognize. And I want to understand how I missed who you really were, how I spent 7 years married to one of the most powerful women in Dallas and somehow convinced myself you were ordinary. Because I let you, Elena said simply, because I wanted to see if you could love ordinary, if you could value the person instead of the portfolio. And you couldn't, Marcus. When tested, you chose cruelty over compassion, image over integrity, your elite circle over the woman who'd built the ladder you climbed. He nodded slowly, accepting the verdict. What happens now? Now you learn to rebuild without me, Elena told him, if you can. The bankruptcy proceedings will resolve your debts. You're young enough to start over, though not in real estate development. No one will back you after this. But you could do something else, something smaller, something that doesn't require the kind of capital and connections you lost. You could learn humility, Marcus. You could become the person you were before ambition poisoned you. And you. I continue as I was, she said, managing my holdings, growing the foundation, funding the kind of projects that actually matter. I'll be fine, Marcus. I've always been fine. The question is whether you can learn to be fine without requiring other people's destruction to feel successful. He stood there in her foyer for another long moment, and Elena saw the exact instant he truly understood. Understood not just that he'd lost everything, but that he'd lost it because he'd failed to see value in what he had. The comprehension broke something in his expression, and he turned toward the door without another word, leaving her standing alone in space that suddenly felt vast and empty, despite her billions. The Rosewood Gala 6 months later represented everything Dallas society valued. Wealth displayed with taste, power exercised with discretion, philanthropy performed with appropriate public recognition. Elena arrived in a midnight blue gown that cost more than Marcus's monthly motel rent. Her hair swept into an elegant chignon, diamond earrings catching light as she moved through the grand ballroom where 1,000 guests had gathered to celebrate the city's most influential charitable organizations. She was announced as she entered, Ms. Elena Ashford, chairwoman of Meridian Capital Holdings and president of the Ashford Foundation. And the room's energy shifted perceptibly. People turned, conversations paused, the kind of attention that money and power commanded without requiring aggressive pursuit. In 6 months, Elena had stepped from shadows into deliberate visibility, accepting board positions and speaking engagements, allowing her name and her story, carefully curated and controlled, to reshape public understanding of who she was and always had been. The media had eventually pieced together enough details to construct narrative. Billionaire heiress who'd hidden her identity, husband who'd publicly humiliated her without knowing she owned his future, Swift and total financial destruction as consequence of his arrogance. The story had become cautionary tale, discussed in business schools and women's networking groups as example of why you should never underestimate people and why power held quietly often proved more effective than power displayed loudly. Elena moved through the gala with practiced grace, accepting congratulations on her foundation's recent $100 million initiative to fund women entrepreneurs in underserved communities. She spoke with investors about opportunities in sustainable technology. She laughed at appropriate moments during the dinner speeches and applauded the award recipients with genuine enthusiasm. She was, to external observation, completely composed and utterly successful, the woman who'd reclaimed her power and emerged stronger. She didn't see Marcus until dessert service, when she stepped onto the terrace for air and found him standing near the railing, wearing an ill-fitting suit that suggested rental rather than ownership, staring through glass doors at the celebration he'd once belonged to and could no longer access. Marcus. She said his name before deciding whether to acknowledge him at all. He turned, and she saw someone different than the broken man who'd appeared at her door 6 months ago. Not restored to his former confidence, that had been false construction anyway, but changed in some fundamental way, quieter, humbler, the kind of different that suggested actual transformation rather than strategic performance. Elena, or should I call you Miss Ashford now? A ghost of self-deprecating humor touched his expression. I wasn't planning to approach you. I'm actually here with a client. I'm doing project management consulting now. Small developments, nothing like before. He invited me as his guest. I was about to leave when I saw you and thought. He stopped. I don't know what I thought. You thought you should say something, Elena finished. Congratulations, probably. You're succeeding in ways you would have celebrated if you'd understood who I was. I would have celebrated and immediately tried to use you, Marcus acknowledged. I've had a lot of time to think about who I was, Elena. A lot of empty hours in that motel room, and then in the tiny apartment I could finally afford, working through how I became someone capable of pouring wine on his wife at her moment of trying to support him. Elena studied him, searching for manipulation and finding only tired honesty. And what did you conclude? That success became my identity instead of something I achieved, he said quietly. That I measured my worth by external validation, the size of deals, the status of clients, the envy of competitors. And when you didn't reflect that back to me in ways I wanted, I resented you for it. I thought you diminished me by being ordinary, when in fact you were extraordinary, and I was too blind to see it. The admission hung between them in night air, punctuated by laughter from inside the ballroom. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps release of the anger she'd carried. I'm glad you understand that now, she said, even if understanding came at tremendous cost. The cost was deserved, Marcus replied. I'm not here asking for anything, Elena. Not reconciliation, not financial help, not even friendship. I just wanted you to know that I see you now. I see what I missed, what I destroyed, what I lost, and I'm sorry. Elena nodded slowly. I believe you, and I hope you build something better this time, Marcus. Something that doesn't require stepping on other people to feel tall. I'm trying, he glanced back at the gala. You belong in there, with those people. I never did, really. I was always pretending, always performing, always terrified someone would realize I didn't have enough substance to justify the spotlight. You could have, Elena told him, surprised to find she meant it. You could have built something real if you'd focused on the work instead of the image, on partnership instead of domination. But you chose differently. I did. Marcus started to say something else, stopped, then continued anyway. Vanessa called last week. She's engaged to someone in tech, someone whose company survived the market downturn. She wanted to, I don't even know what she wanted. Closure? Confirmation that I was still destroyed? I told her I hoped she'd be happy and ended the call. That's progress, Elena said quietly. Maybe. He looked at her directly then, and she saw genuine sorrow in his eyes. I loved you, Elena. I know I failed to show it, failed to honor it, failed you in every way that mattered. But before ambition poisoned everything, I did love you, and I'm sorry I let that love die because I was too shallow to recognize what I had. Elena felt tears threaten but controlled them, maintaining the composure that had become her armor and her shield. I loved you too, Marcus, which is why your cruelty hurt so much, and why I'm glad we're both moving forward into different futures. He nodded, understanding the dismissal. Congratulations on everything you're building, Elena. The foundation, the investments, the life you're creating. You're doing what I pretended to, actually making difference, actually creating value instead of just extracting it. He left then, walking back through the terrace doors and disappearing into the ballroom crowd before exiting completely, and Elena stood alone watching her reflection in darkened glass. Inside, someone was toasting her foundation's achievements. Outside, the man who'd humiliated her was driving away in a borrowed car toward a small apartment and a modest life that might, if he worked at it, if he genuinely changed, contain more authentic success than anything he'd built on her hidden support. She wiped her eyes carefully, preserving her makeup, and returned to the gala. The chairwoman of Meridian Capital Holdings had speeches to make, donors to thank, initiatives to announce. Elena Ashford had work to do, an empire to manage, and a future to build that would never again depend on making herself small so someone else could feel big. The lesson had cost her marriage and years of hidden potential, but she'd learned it thoroughly. Some people only recognize value after destroying it, and the truest power belonged to those who knew their worth even when standing in shadows, even when wearing wine-stained dresses, even when the world insisted they were ordinary. She was extraordinary. She'd always been, and now everyone knew.